Did you ever play Shining Force? That tactical RPG way back on the Sega Genesis in the 1990s? Well, if you did or didn't, we're going to take a look at what that series has turned into over the past 20 plus years. Spoiler alert. It's very anime, very JRPG, and full of romance. Originally a Japanese-only game on the PlayStation 3, here is my review of the Nintendo Switch version of Shining Resonance Refrain. The story of Shining Resonance centers around a young boy named Yuma, who serves as the vessel for a legendary dragon from an ancient war. Because he is this ancient dragon's vessel, he's become the target for both sides of a bloody war. The invading army that wishes to use dragons as tools of war, and the country that army is invading. Upon being rescued by one side, Yuma swears to use his power to fight back the invaders and bring peace. Now, the story of this game isn't what I would call bad in any way. It's got a lot of really great character development, especially with how it fleshes out each character's arc through the affection and romance system and gameplay. But they use some JRPG cliches a little too much. One example is where you have a boss fight. You beat the boss and suddenly, out of nowhere, another enemy strikes them down and fights you instead. Now, there's nothing wrong with this particular cliche, but Shining Resonance uses it in pretty much every chapter of the game, sometimes more than once in each chapter. It's a prime example of too much of a good thing isn't always a good thing. Unlike its origins, Shining Resonance is actually an action RPG with some light strategy elements and some dating sim and romance elements thrown into the mix. As you go through the game, you're going to be exploring areas, fighting monsters in real-time battles, and spending your off time getting to know your teammates. Now, the first thing we need to note is this is an enhanced port of Shining Resonance for the PlayStation 3, which never left Japan. In terms of differences, Refrain is packed in with all of the DLC that came out for the Japanese PS3 release. It also includes 2 different game modes that you can play through the story with, Original Mode and Refrain Mode, which isn't really that different from Original Mode. It's basically Original Mode with the 2 DLC characters from the Japanese PS3 release, as well as having character events and character endings to flesh out their backgrounds. So the way you progress in this game is you go where the story tells you to go. You've got a hub world and a bunch of dungeons that you can explore outside the hub world that all connect with one another. The story progresses forwards through chapters and you're constantly given new objectives to reach, places to go, which will trigger more story events, boss fights, and pushing you towards your next chapter and your next story goal. But going out into the world and fighting enemies and seeing story isn't all you can do. In your off time, you can spend time with your other party members, focusing on the affection and romance features of this game. Any day, at any time, you can talk to any of your party members around the hub city, and depending on how you answer questions they have, their affection rating can go up or down. Get their affection high enough, and they'll be willing to spend time with you through nighttime character-to-character events, and they'll even ask you out on dates so you can dive even further into their character backgrounds. Now, this is a fairly in-depth romance feature, and the main point of it is the ending system. Every character has their own ending that's only accessible if their affection rating is high enough when you go to fight the final boss. Now, the thing I really like about this is that you can manually choose which ending you get when you fight the final boss. So you can have every party member's affection at max, save right before the final boss, beat the final boss for Kirika's ending, reload your save, fight the final boss again for Rina's ending. You're not locked to only one ending per playthrough. Now let's get into exploration and combat. You've got a hub world and then you've got all these dungeons that are connected to one another. And this is an interesting way of doing things, but there's a major quality of life problem with how this is done. And that is the lack of fast travel. The further you get into the game, the further you're going to have to travel out of the city to get to where your objectives are. At the start of the game, not really a big problem. Go through dungeons A and B to get to this story event and this boss fight and come back to the city. Towards the end of the game, go through 4 or 5 dungeons in branching paths to get to this area where you're going to have a 2 or 3 minute cutscene, a boss fight, and come right back here. With the lack of fast travel outside of an item that returns you to the city, it becomes a real chore to constantly run through all these dungeons just to have a boss fight and get thrown back just to have to go through the same path again to go a little bit farther for a new boss fight and repeat that process. There are camps all over the world map, so this could easily have been solved with a simple, fast travel system for the camps. Now let's get into combat for a moment. When you're in battle, you run around in real time, and you can string together combos with normal attacks, heavy attack, and skills that use your MP. It is very easy to chain and link these attacks together, so I view this part of the combat system as being very similar to the combat system that the Tales franchise uses. But the combat system is unique as well through the band and dragon systems. Since all of the party members' weapons are instruments, you can come together as a band and perform songs that will affect combat in different ways, like decreasing damage you take or preventing status ailments. This also ties into the dragon form system. Since Yuma is a vessel for a dragon, he can tap into that power as long as he has MP and fight as a dragon. This adds a lot of ease to some of the fights, but also some strategy. The dragon is significantly stronger than Yuma's human form, but it can go berserk at any time, so you have to be careful on how and when you use it. And before I close this section out, let's talk about difficulty for a second. Shining Resonance is like a retro RPG, and is filled with massive difficulty spikes at most boss fights. There will very rarely be a situation where you'll be fighting a boss that isn't at least 10 or 20 levels higher than your party. As such, the game requires a significant amount of level grinding. Now, of course, you're thinking, okay, this is an action RPG. All I have to do is learn boss patterns, dodge around them, and I can fight them even if I am 20 or 30 levels lower. And that is true, you can, but your other party members can't. The grinding is less for you to get stronger, and more for your party members to become strong enough to competently fight, so that you can be focused on actually fighting the boss rather than focusing on constantly using items to heal your party members. This is a problem not because you have to grind, but because of how much you have to grind. You get to a boss in, say, chapter 4 or 5, and you have to do an hour or two of grinding. Okay, I'd do some grinding. Then as soon as you clear that boss, the next boss shows up and you need to do another hour or two of grinding. And that process repeats, creating a situation where you're almost constantly grinding, and grinding some more. Now you can switch to the casual difficulty to not grind nearly as much, but even the casual difficulty requires a good amount of grinding before you get to the end of the game. And that brings us to the game's length. When I played the game, I played on the normal difficulty for about the first half or so, and then I switched to the casual difficulty when the grinding requirements just got ridiculous. When I finally reached and beat the final boss, I'd been playing for about 32 hours. Now let's get into presentation, which is one of the game's really nice features. Graphically, the game looks beautiful. When you've got it docked, it pretty much has no blemishes and no jagged edges. Doesn't really look that different from the PS4 and Xbox One versions of this game. Now in handheld mode, there are a few jaggies here and there, but it still looks really colorful and really beautiful. The only hindrance on this is a small hiccup in performance. During some fights, the frames will drop for a split second when you strike enemies. This is mostly when you hit more than one enemy at once. It's not a huge issue, and if you're a handheld gamer, it's even less of an issue, because when I've been playing the game in handheld mode, it was a lot harder for me to notice these sudden drops. Now, battery life. Given how beautiful the game was, I was actually surprised at the battery times. Here's what I got from 100% to 0%. Maximum brightness with the Wi-Fi on, 3 hours, 11 minutes. Maximum brightness with the Wi-Fi off, 3 hours, 22 minutes. Lower brightness with the Wi-Fi on, 3 hours and 56 minutes. Lower brightness with the Wi-Fi off, 4 hours and 8 minutes. 3 to 4 hours for a game that's really graphically pretty and intense. Kudos to Sega, you really optimized this game well. Now, in conclusion, Shining Resonance Refrain is a beautiful JRPG to have on the go or on the big screen. Although it is held back by overusing some cliches and some quality of life issues. If you like anime RPGs and are willing to do just a bit of grinding, this is an RPG that's worth that grind. Reviews to Go rates Shining Resonance Refrain for the Nintendo Switch a 7.5 out of 10. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below or head to the website at www.reviewstogo.com.